The first guest that we had, which was of real notoriety, was Jinal Shah.
Yes,
And he talked about his journey from finishing school, going into A levels, then going into university. He's worked with the Jane Student Association, as well as his gap year with BP, and what he's been doing ever since. And we've been keeping in touch with him on LinkedIn
yes.
and on Instagram. So, what's the biggest thing that you learned from him?
I think um just hard work. I mean, what he talked about is working hard, trying to get those good A levels, trying to get that internship at BP, and it was just a consequence of his hard work was it was success. I mean, he did what he wanted to do, and he was only able to do that with the choices he was given, and he was only given the choices because he worked hard and worked diligently. So I'd say that, but then, I mean, when we were talking to him, he was still in Scotland, and he was having the time of his life there. I mean, he was enjoying it. He was exploring Scotland. I remember there was some time he was telling us about going to the beach or something,
Yeah.
and it was just moments and memories like that. I think is a great takeaway for any young person aspiring to be anything. Is that if you do wish to pursue something, I mean, hard work's obviously one step to get there, but you get to reap the rewards once you do the hard work. And yeah, so I think that would be one of the biggest takeaways that I've got from him. How about you, Dylan?
So I agree. I think it's actually really important because when we sort of define success, I think this is quite an important thing. Your dad actually said this to me, and this podcast really relates to this. When we define success, we shouldn't just look at it in like one linear way. I think success is really multifaceted. And I think the two biggest components in that are, have you worked hard and worked smart? Have you managed to put yourself in a position to succeed? And have you had loads of fun? Have you had fun? Have you enjoyed yourself and have you built connections with people? And I think that's the biggest thing that I learned. It's when it comes to defining success and defining where you want to go in life, you can't just look at it in one specific area. You can't just say, I want to get this job, I want to do this university degree, I want to do this, that. But this is all very much angled around your work life. But remember, there's also that other side of you, and it's about gaining a holistic picture of success and what you can gain from that and how you can achieve all of that because it's very much possible. And I think Geno's living proof of that, that he's on the stepping stones to being a really successful person because he's having fun, he's working hard, and you can see that he's got that broad picture. He's giving back with the Jane Student Association. So he's got all of that going, and now it's just about building upon that. And yeah, I think he really taught me that.
I think this isn't in no particular order. I mean, we're just going to do a quick, brief run through of all the guests, and so I think one of the other guests that I think we can safely say we learned a lot from was our dear friend Veer, who we had earlier on in January. And so, Dylan, if you don't mind, what would you say was your biggest takeaway from that podcast?
It's interesting because I've known Veer for like 12 years of my life. And he's genuinely like me and him don't talk that much because we don't need to. Like whenever we see each other, it's literally that connection is there. And I think I learned actually it's the importance of distance. And sometimes as a mate, when your mate's going through something, sometimes the best thing is to tell them that you're there, but you also need to let them find their own path. And you need to let them sort of deal with it on their own. Because as much as it can be, you really want to make sure that you're there, you're helping them and everything. One that can induce dependency, but also it might just push them away further. And it's those subtle reassurances, those subtle just being there. Sometimes just being there for the mate is all that matters. You don't even have to say anything. So that importance of distance where you don't have to have that verbal communication, but also you just have to be there. Or sometimes just dropping him a line, dropping your mate a line, just be like, "Hey man, how you doing?" That could mean the world. It's the importance of those little things and the fact that distance doesn't always matter. I think that's what I
Yeah,
learned.
I could only really echo that. But I think in terms of our podcast so far, I think that was probably one of the most emotional. And I would, I think one of the key things that I took away from it was giving people space when they wished for it, but also in order to confidently give them space, you need to have that relationship with them in which they're able to, in which they know that you're just constantly there, even though you're not necessarily present. And I think that's something that can only be built up over time. I mean, Veer talked about one of his friends at school, who was really important, his sister as well. And it was relationships that he's built with people like that that ultimately, hopefully, made the best out of out of an awful situation.
Yeah, no, I completely echo that. Another one that we had actually that was very early on was when we were talking about universities and the value of education, and we got my brother's best mate Niam on
Yes.
talking about all of that. And especially this is very poignant coming to us now, where we're going to be deciding all of this. What did you learn from that sort of podcast?
I mean, in my very awful memory of things that happened more than a year ago now.
Yeah,
Um, but he said you can't live in regret, because if you live in regret, you're not proud of the person that you are today. I'm probably paraphrasing that. But I remember listening to that, and I think that was something that's really important, and that's something I've taken away, um, and I've actually used and said in just casually now, because I think it's really important what he taught me personally, and that's because he's gone down a completely different path to what the norm would be. I mean, he went to university, but then he quit his job, but then he wanted to pursue something that he actually wanted to do. And I think that's something that's also really important to do. I mean, he didn't want to be, I guess one could describe him as a slave to himself in many ways, doing something just because he had to, or just because it was seen as correct. Rather, he was doing something because he was genuinely passionate about it. And I think that's something that's really important.